He stressed, as in his version of what he thinks a gaucho looks like. So John graduated in 1983. That's a little depressing statistic. I was the chair of John's dissertation committee, and we worked together. One of the first books I published, John and I co-authored, called Rethinking Rental Housing. I was never good on titles, but the book was important.
Supposed to Give Me Shelter.
Right, Give Me Shelter would have been better.
Jagger said no.
Anyhow, so I'm just going to read all these accolades, and then I'll say just a few things. He's a professor in graduate planning, public administration, and urban affairs at the University of Louisville, where he also directs the highly lauded Center for Sustainable Urban Neighborhoods. He is also a fellow at the Scholars Strategy Network at Harvard under the direction of Theda Skocpol. In an international poll of thousands of urbanists, planners, and architects, he was ranked as one of the top 100 urban thinkers in the world. I voted 400 times in that poll, however. His research has appeared in 8 co-authored or edited books, nearly 50 scholarly peer-reviewed journals, 30 chapters in edited books, 11 monographs, and dozens of opinion pieces. I feel like this is your bio bib, and this is a promotion case. Among other things, the New York Times ran a Sunday feature of his work reviewing poor neighborhoods. He's gotten numerous awards and medals, including the Presidential Medal for Distinguished Faculty Research at the University of Louisville, which is the highest honor that they give there. And I think you got that at halftime at a game or something in the stadium.
Basketball or something.
Right.
If you could be on the basketball court with Rick Pitino, it's like awesome.
John's book, which I co-authored, doesn't say that here, but I'll put that in, Rethinking Rental Housing, was called the most significant piece on housing policy research and written in the last 40 years by the president of the American Planning Association. His 2005 book, Promise and Betrayal, University and the Battle for Sustainable Urban Neighborhoods, includes an introduction by former HUD Secretary Henry Cisneros and letters of endorsement from President Bill Clinton and Harvard President Derek Bach. He is currently finishing a new book, which I think is the theme of today's talk, 10 Commandments for Urban Regeneration, Creating Healthy, Prosperous, Safe, and Just Neighborhoods. Should also mention that he has run a private consulting firm with clients ranging from the Secretary of HUD to small cities in the U.S. and around the world. I also know that John is a great teacher. He's taken his students on tours all over the place. San Francisco, he ran tours of Cuba for a while. And as I was saying earlier, back when John was still in California, he took a little leave from his graduate training and worked in Sacramento. Were you working in the governor's office? And he was a champion for the protection of renters' rights since his research, his doctoral dissertation, focused on the effects of rent control, which at the time was being vilified by the real estate industry. John did a study of moderate rent control in New Jersey, statistically comparing rent controlled with comparable non-rent controlled communities, and found that the predictions that it would discourage investment in housing, lead to deterioration, none of that was true. And so he is a bulwark for tenants' rights in California. And that was a legacy that I continued long after John left. So it's my great pleasure to welcome El Gaucho Supremo, John Gilderbloom.
Thank you. Thank you. I also want to know, too, that the nation actually, when we were doing those rent control studies in Santa Barbara, there were actually threats against my life, and it was very scary. And the Nation magazine, I think it was 1979, May 28th, I think, had letters that they found. It says, we've got to find a way to neutralize Gilderbloom. And they actually came on the campus trying to buy The Economist here and saying, you've got to find a way to knock out this research. And as a result, we were sort of like the epicenter of knowledge about renters' rights, homeless rights, and everything like that, right here at UCSB. It was very, very exciting. Anyway, this is my book, and I've been working for 30 years in, which sounds odd coming from California, but I work in black neighborhoods. I literally work in the poorest of the black neighborhoods in America, starting in Houston in 1984, and working there with ministers, and then coming up to Louisville and working there for the past 27 years. So altogether, it's been about 30 3 years of research that we're putting together. And it's a little different than the California model about organizing, but we have some significant problems here. Mark Twain had a great line about Kentucky, which is when he was lecturing through Cincinnati into Covington, into Louisville, he had this great line which he says, "I hope to die in Kentucky because everything happens here 20 years later." And so it's, and actually, it reverse is actually quite different. If you live in Kentucky right now, according to the Center for Disease Control, with the bad diets, the bad exercise diets, the smoking, bad health with that, and some of the worst air, water, and soil, people on average live a healthy lifestyle of about 62.5 years. 62.5 years, compared to, say, Portland, Oregon, where it's clean, water's good, air is good, people don't smoke as much, they don't drink as much, and you live there an average of 77 years. Nationally, the average is about 75 years. So you take a vow of death when you come to Kentucky, which is very sad, and something to work on, and probably an emerging theme of my work. I really believe, and this is a celebration of research here at the University of California, Santa Barbara, that Richard Applebaum and Harvey Mollich in 1975 studied the impacts of growth. And it was an amazing study. And I don't think Rich has given himself enough credit, or the world has given him enough credit, but I will. And that is that he really said, what are the impacts of when you grow? And studying the issues of unemployment, quality of life issues, and equity within neighborhoods. Who gets it, who doesn't? Who has the best parks, who has the bus stations, who has the bike lanes, and so on. And climate warming is killing our civilization. And it is killing us. And we're on the time clock. And this weather here today, and yesterday when I was in San Luis Obispo lecturing, is abnormal. It shouldn't be 84 degrees on February 11th, and people shouldn't be in shorts and like Rich is right now. You shouldn't be there. It used to be cold here. It used to be actually you'd wear jackets and everything. That's why I got my jacket on. But this is abnormal. It's absolutely abnormal. This coming weekend, I go up skiing, for example, up to the Sierras. There's no snow up there. When I was a kid, Thanksgiving, we'd be up there skiing in the Tahoe area, and there's absolutely no snow. It's an awful condition, and we are heating up our climate to record levels, and it's going to cause the droughts that you're facing, irregular heat, irregular weather, fires, and I know that, sadly enough, Rich's tragedy of losing his entire home and so on is all related to the climate change and so on, and warming and so on, and not enough water and so on. We are living on borrowed time right now. We've got to do something about it. And in our work, the worst thing that's happening right now, and it's interesting, is the southern brown cities are killing us. The energy output, for example, if you compare New York to Atlanta right now, is that the footprint there is triple the carbon release in the city of Atlanta right now, in a sprawling, suburban, congested area as compared to New York, where people live on top of each other, they share the walls, ceilings, and floors. And they have a lifestyle of limited cars, walking, riding their bikes, and that's probably why Harvey Mollich went off to New York as well to experience that. So what are the commandments? It's interesting, Ted Turner once said that the 10 Commandments, they had some good ideas in there, of course, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not fool around with someone else's wife or something like that, or husband or whatever. The main thing is, if you look at the 10 Commandments, there was nothing that said stewardship over the earth, sort of an ownership or a quality of life issue in terms of how do we embrace, honor our earth, and take care of it by good environmental practices. And that should be really the 11th commandment if you want to know the truth. So what are the actions result in sustainable neighborhoods? And the one commandment is, and I'm going to go through it really quickly, there's 10 of them, one is historic preservation, regenerate neighborhoods. And this is actually my neighborhood right now in Louisville, Kentucky. And we fight to preserve these great historic structures. Teasing you with a little bit of that. A lot of what's going on in the inner city is historic conversions, taking attics, basements, garage apartments. That's become another movement, which is using what we already have, creating more housing and so on. That's kind of a movement of in-law apartments, which I found in my dissertation. Actually, the more small landlords you have, the more affordable if they have more garage apartments. And here's some work we've done in terms of looking at these conversions. This is one of the conversions I did. Thank you, Rich. Okay, continue on. Another example. And this is it. If we can stay there right now, if you go back one, Rich. We actually, through using passive solar, trees, air, and everything like that, we can actually heat this place, this 600 square foot attic apartment, for $27 a month. You know, no gadgets or anything like that. Open it up, put out the air, and so on. And it's been fun. And that's the design I worked on. It's another student project. We have students to say, you know, it's assignment, which is design of an attic apartment, and it's affordable. One of the things you're finding in the city, whether it's Atlanta, Phoenix, Houston, and so on, is this movement for where young people are moving to downtown areas. They're limiting they're reducing their thing, and this is the suburban areas right here. But the highest percentage increase, whether it's black or white neighborhoods, which is, I'll argue later, is a good thing, is that in the downtown business core right here, the 10 highest increases in property values is in black and white historic neighborhoods where you saw them before. And that's a bunch of, and I'm going to go through that. But the point I'm saying is that instead of cutting down a whole bunch of trees, instead of expanding the roadways and so on, instead of having people commute longer distances and more commute, it's better to build in. And that's the movement. And that's, if you look at the maps and so on we've done, the suburban areas are the ones that really, even in the South, are losing value. There's a growing movement of where poor people are living in these houses, and the abandonment rates, the foreclosure rates are even getting much higher than in the downtown areas. The second commandment is EPA toxic waste sites. It's a problem nearby. We don't have this problem in California. I talked to the mayor of Portland last year at a conference, and he said very clearly, he said, we take our chemical factories, we don't allow pollution in Portland, we want good air, we want good soil, we want good water, and so on. And this is a major problem in Louisville and in the South. And in that article I wrote for the Scholar Strategy Network, this is in Louisville. This is hidden from Louisville. And this is one of the, we have in Louisville, I'm in the heart of the beast. It's kind of like what Che Guevara says, go back to America and get in the heart of the beast. We are the beast in terms of pollution. We have the highest release of greenhouse gases in the entire country. And these plastic companies, which originally was located in what was called Little Africa, was placed there, and it's a form of environmental racism. The problem is, if you look at this stuff, this is a park in a black neighborhood where if you touch the water, you can get sick, literally sick, and so on. And it's a growing problem, and they're polluting more. The mayor's reaction, who's Democrat, has been to reduce the amount of EPA enforcement. We had two candidates run for U.S. Senate, both a Democrat and a Republican, and they both ran on the campaign of saying, get the EPA out of Kentucky, stop the regulation, it's hurting jobs. And one of the things we've shown is that it's green states like Oregon, California, Idaho, Washington, that have actually lower unemployment, and it's the brown states in the South that largely have much higher unemployment and far worse jobs in terms of economic development. But this is the major problem, and the problem is that it also affects housing stock, abandonment, and so on. And this is an article that came out this year in the Journal of Urbanism, edited by UCSB graduate Emily Talon, who's a superstar. Hi, Emily, how are you? The next commandment is something that Santa Barbara has, and this has really gained traction with us. Really proud of the fact is that recently were nominated by Plantazine magazine. And let me get you a really good one here. In Plantazine magazine, it's a planner's journal, and we had the top international ranking there for the most downloaded article. And it was an article about how one-way streets in downtown mid-sized cities are killing neighborhoods, mostly in minority, low-income areas. And this is Cincinnati, and it just doesn't work. One of the things we're finding is where there's multi-lane one-way streets, they're located in black neighborhoods, they're located in poor neighborhoods, they're located in downtown areas, and it's a place where you'll see an uptick in crime, uptick in foreclosures, an uptick in reduced housing values in these neighborhoods, and a lot less use of the street. When we did a study where we converted these streets in Old Louisville, which is a minority neighborhood, which is supported by low-income people and blacks. You can go to the next one, I think. And one of the things we found was that in our study was that the neighborhood started turning around, homeowners benefited, there was a rapid improvement, traffic was slowed down, and compared to what the traffic engineers often say is there wasn't maximum use of the streets. It's actually going slow and going on the two-way streets actually encouraged more people on the street and use of the street. More businesses popped up, more local and landlords. And here's a quick statistic that we just did was that converting, and there's a national movement. I was interviewed yesterday. Over 100 cities have gotten the news in terms of planning and are converting their streets, getting ready for the influx of people. And we are the epicenter of this movement. We have the data and everything like that. It's quite interesting sociologically. I always bring this up because we lost an officer, a police officer in Louisville, which, and I think Rich has been to my house on First Street, and he was going the wrong way on a one-way street, and he died, and then crashing into another car on a way to a burglary. And then on the other hand, we also had 3 children that were mowed down when an escaped convict was driving 50 miles an hour the wrong way, and so on. And more recently, we had another African-American gentleman that was killed riding his bike because the driver was considered not at fault because he was going the wrong way on a one-way street. This is a terrific problem we have. But since we converted it, more people are living. There's been no deaths on these streets and so on. And that's coming out in another study. Next commandment, increase walkability and biking. People love to walk. And one of the things we're seeing, and this is kind of a Richard Florida, Joe Courtwright, an economist and so on, is that young people are choosing cities that are green, where they can walk more, where they can ride their bikes more. And I can't tell you how the impact of being in Santa Barbara and being able to ride my bike for 10 years, and that was 50 pounds ago.
I rode in today.
50 pounds ago, I was a skinny young man. And biking is good. And I have a few slides here to show you, not much, but one of the things is the physical activity is the second leading cause of death. In 1906, when the Model T came out, we became a sedentary world or nation or something like that. We just sat, we drove everywhere. And in fact, it made it possible for us to not even get outside our house, but with the automatic garage door opener, just open it up and just come right in. We have an obesity problem in the suburbs. It's much worse. 60% of adults who are 50 years older or more are obese in this nation. 30% of the people who live in urban downtown areas are less obese. But this is the really big thing. Tobacco is the killer, of course, but physical inactivity is one of the leading causes, second causes of death. And a lot of this is related to these other issues. But if we exercise more, and Rich has a great story about that, but if we exercise more, we'll live longer, we'll fight depression, we'll be, it's a zero carbon release. So just a little quick number on that. And reasons for everyone to support cycling. And one great dissertation topic here is that Davis has sort of grabbed the crown of being the bicycle capital of the United States. But really, they have confessed to me, she has confessed to me, that it's really, there's more bicycle ridership in Isla Vista. And yet, we've never studied that and its impacts and so on. But I know, for example, that with bicycle, if you reduce your car, and I've taken a pledge with my university to not use my car to go to school, there's an actual savings of $8,000 to $9,000 a year if you can give up a car. More on that later. One of the things is our nirvana is the Netherlands. And you'll see that strictly using cars to get around is 27%. On average, it's about half the population. If you put in the proper infrastructure and so on, it's not a male-dominated type of activity, but it's both. Females tend to ride their bikes more than males because of the infrastructure, which is friendly with bike paths and bike lanes and so on. But look where the United States is, 1%. And that's why, places like, and this is what my advocacy work is, you get a lot of good exercise and so on, but also you reduce your carbon footprint. And that's why in the Netherlands, they've reduced their carbon footprint. The same thing in Portland, which is a reduction. It's the only city, major city, that has reduced its carbon footprint. Sorry, Santa Barbara. Here's the $8,000. One of the things we did in the small community, which was a very poor neighborhood, racially mixed, is that we're trying to get 25% of the people in the old Louisville neighborhood, because they're so close to downtown, to bicycle. And we did some estimations, which was basically the savings you could get. And it was up to $60 million in savings in that neighborhood that could be spent locally. And when we asked them what would you do with that savings, people said they'd improve their housing, they would build a garden. About 10% said they'd build a garden, go to buy more music and books, make more clothing and accessories, get quality groceries, and so on. It was all pretty good things. If you give up a car, you spend your money on other things that produces local economic development. And this is the neighborhood I live in, and we have the bicycle patrol, which is often they say is more effective than being in a car, and so on. This is, Rich forgot that I took people to the Netherlands for 5 years and so on, and we studied that. And boy, did they love the Netherlands. They were, some of these people, it just really changed their lives and so on. And they're doing all great things here. Very proud of that class. Support urban canopy. Al Gore said plant a tree. That was his big thing, was plant a tree in his famous book. But poor areas have less trees and plants and community gardens than other places. Trees also wash the filthy, dirty, and toxic air. When trees die, humans do as well. It also creates human capital. If you can create more trees and more community and so on, you're doing well. The point is that there's a growing movement, and I have to tell you this, and I told this to Harvey Mollich last year in San Francisco. I said, do you realize you were ahead of your game when you said, you wanted me to do my dissertation on community garden movement in Santa Barbara in 1979. He actually took me out to Paul Rellis's big community garden out there, and where they're doing an urban garden. Well, that's become a big issue in terms of growing food and so on. And it's very good. But one of the things we've been able to show is by using helicopters and things and filming it is that poor areas have less trees. The heat island effect in West Louisville is so bad, where African Americans and the poor live, is that the heat there in the summer is 10 degrees higher than, say, where I live. It's not a pleasant place to walk. It's not a pleasant place to ride bikes. And again, my statement is, where you have no trees or trees are dying, that means less washing of the filthy air and more pollution. And that's why in these neighborhoods, people die, African Americans, along with half the reason why they die early is because of the bad pollutions. It's a 10-year difference between blacks who live in the West Louisville near the plastic plants and the brownfields, 27 brownfields, versus where I live out in the east part of the town. 10-year difference, whether you're black or white. It's location that matters, and a social problem. And then here's some pictures locally. It's a beautiful thing, to get people together, and that's what I mean by human capital, people coming together, learning about each other, growing their own plants and so on. And I actually have a few students who are doing dissertations on this subject. And that, to me, is beautiful. Encourage investment in downtown areas. The argument is that the whole debate should not revolve around Harlem, New York. It shouldn't revolve around Washington, D.C. by Paradise. But in the mid-sized cities, we are dying. More cities, and the work of John Logan shows there's more continuing disinvestment, and we lose that whole infrastructure. And I think investment, especially when I work with African Americans who say, why can't we build up our equity in our homes and so on? And why are we the dumping ground for all kinds of things? Why don't we just open it up and spread it around and so on? And the great line is, what's worse than gentrification? No gentrification. And people want to build up their equity, their value of their home. It's the largest source of their retirement income, and that's what homeownership is about. And creating an equitable neighborhood for the poor results in people being pushed out of homes. That's often the argument. It's counterintuitive, and the studies have shown that in Harlem, that in Washington, D.C., that in Cleveland, and now in Louisville, that actually people, where there's investment going in, people live there longer in terms of homeowners, seeing that their equity is rising steadily, and renters as well, because they see some improvements going on. They say, oh, there's a bike path now. I don't have to use my car anymore. I'm going to pay a little bit more rent, but I'm going to get this. Or they see crime. And I think my argument is that it's kind of like what Martin Luther King says. It's better if we all live together, close by, races and so on. And in Louisville, one of the problems is it's high segregation. I mean, if you're black, you can live your whole life for a week without seeing a white person. And if you're white, you can live in a neighborhood where you won't even see a black person, not even in McDonald's. That's how segregated it is. And I think if we live closer together, there's better understanding and so on. And the latest City Lab in Atlantic Magazine, my student, writes about this and finds that in urban areas are much more blue, democratic, progressive, and green than in the outer suburban areas as well. So if we can move people in, it's all good. I know that this is, I guess this is my takeaway here. Studies show that neighborhoods where green improvements take place result in people staying there longer. Job creation. This is what people at San Luis Obispo thought was the best part of it. I work with developers who build in downtown neighborhoods, including one of Rich's best friend who he connected me with, Marilyn Maconian. And there are lots of empty lots, abandoned blocks, neighborhoods and so on that need reinvestment. And Marilyn has been a leader in that. In fact, and they went to school together, and they're like, and he introduced me to her. And I've since, 30 years later, I'm still working with her. And she has built, and so there's another dissertation topic for you all. Here's a woman, a white woman, that got together and specialized in building black neighborhoods. And she's built an investment of $16.5 billion, 16,000 housing units altogether, with an investment of $2.5 billion. And she's become the go-to person in terms of doing inner city renewal. And no one's getting displaced. I mean, in the development we did, just to emphasize this, in what's called East Russell area, where we worked together, and by putting that development in there, she took an old abandoned public housing project, redesigned it, put in trees, did all the green urban thinking, bike paths and so on. And with that placement and with that development, and then other houses came in, middle-class houses built in abandoned lots and so on. There was $30 million worth of investment. It went up to $40 million. And finally, it's been up to $50 million invested in this black neighborhood. And in the latest article in Community Development Journal, we have an argument, and we show there that, in fact, nobody was displaced. It's still a low and moderate income neighborhood, but people have better housing, better home ownership opportunities. Maybe there's a little bit of an uptick, but no blacks were displaced. It's still 95% black. And of course, you have to understand this is the South. So, but the issue here about job creation is we've been able to, when I worked in for Andrew Cuomo, who was the Secretary of Housing, now he's the governor, and I worked for Henry Cisneros. they had me do calculations about job creation, and we've actually been able to prove this, that for every $1 million invested in inner city neighborhoods creates 17 jobs. That's far better than investment when Obama was, when we had the financial collapse and said, we need more freeways, and was conned into that. Every time you build a freeway and you invest $1 million, you create 5 jobs. But we trump it. 3 times more jobs. And the fact is, 82% of the jobs going to folks without high school diplomas. Half of these are for minorities. And if you look at the unemployment rates, the highest unemployment rates in the nation are among people who don't get high school diplomas. And so this is a really, I think, a very strong and positive thing, and so on. The crime, as a result of this investment, the crime, and we're talking about all categories, rape, homicide, burglaries and so on, was cut in half as a result of this investment. So I think investment in downtown neighborhoods is a good thing. And liberals should not be opposing it and saying any kind of investment in downtown black neighborhoods is bad. Investment can be green, it can be good, and it brings people together. Encourage investment in downtown practices. What is worse than gentrification? Okay, we got that. One of the things I think that the university needs to be a partner, I got 2 more left, is scientific methods prove the above case. Urban regeneration can work for everyone. And I think that we need to, I was reading Rich's introductory sociology book, of all things, and I think on about page 9 he quotes Max Weber. It says sociology is about talking about inconvenient facts, and we've got to be out there, we've got to be strong and everything like that. And as Rich noted, I was out there in the limelight fighting for these issues and so on, and it was very uncomfortable at times. It was very frightening to see some of the things that had happened to me and so on, some of which I'm not disclosed ever really. But we need to be, we have a moral obligation to tell the truth. Now, as I talk about this, 2 days ago, a Republican presidential prospect from Wisconsin, the governor, says we should get rid of the University of Wisconsin motto, which is to seek truth and improve the human condition, which I think is about what sociology is all about. And instead, he says we should, it should be instead be changed to prepare the workforce to be more obedient. So it's in the New York Times. It's unbelievable. So I really think that why I win these arguments across the nation, whether it's converting one-way to two-way streets, or whether with Rich, the knockout punch, where Reagan actually wanted to, and you need to emphasize this, Rich, Ronald Reagan actually had a proposal to cut off all HUD funding to cities that had rent control, right? And environmental regulations. I mean, he wanted to just knock it out. And we countered that by showing how false these numbers were and fake. The same thing with the inner city, mid-cities, looking at the 160 mid-sized cities in the United States. Again, data showing that the projections about developers saying growth is good and so on, and unlimited growth is good, and suburban growth is good, and so on. You know, we were able to counter that. Or he was more related to that. Very important work. And the 10th one is university community partnerships do work. I've actually gotten millions of dollars from the government, $3.5 million to work with community groups, which I think is awesome, and show them how to make things happen, how to regenerate neighborhoods, and that's been my job. And I think it fits within environmental goals and so on. So I'm going to go to this next one. So urban regeneration means prosperity, where people can live a good life in terms of better health, safety. We're finding that these kind of measures that the green people are arguing for means that people are safe. When I was here, they had the first Take Back the Night, which was about that women have the right to the city. And it was this horrible issue where 3 of my friends, women friends, you were involved in that too, were killed by a madman, you know, just grabbing women off the street, raping them and dismembering them and so on. So I've always embraced that, you know. We all have the right to the city. We all have the right to the urban area, that we can walk there freely at night and in the day and enjoy the fruits of the city. You can't take car out of carbon. We got to reduce the carbon footprint. Do you like that? Isn't that great? You can't take car out of the carbon footprint. We've got to find ways to reduce the carbon footprint. Great integrated community of integrated races and better health, less money to countries that hate us, sucking the tit of oil from the Middle East and so on, or from Russia and so on. We don't need it. We need to keep the money inside. Another study done by Joe Courtwright showed that the money that every time people paying for gas in Oregon, 80% of that goes to a foreign country. And you traced it. It was really interesting. You know, let's keep the money here. Greater neighborhood stability. People live longer and everything like that. So my ending here is that green regeneration works. It's a good thing. It's a winner, and we need it for Mother Earth. We need it for good stewardship over the earth, because our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren are at risk, serious risk. And I think that as much as we talk about the neighborhood effect, really what's happening in terms of the neighborhood effect is climate change and all its variants and what's happening. We should not be happy, and we should be very concerned that on February 11th, there's no snow in the Sierras, and it's 82 degrees outside. This is not a day to celebrate good weather at February. So thank you very much. Yes.
So I'm Zach King in the second year in sociology here, and I do my work on climate change and social movements around it. So it's exciting to hear you bringing up those subjects.
You are the most best dressed. Can you get the camera? He's the best. It's just, you know, the uniform of sociologists should be sandals, shorts, and shake shirts. You know. And,
well, if I had a jacket like that, I would have worn it. I don't.
You're very well.
Thank you. Thanks. My question actually, and I'm from Santa Barbara. I've been here my whole life. I work on activist issues around the city, and so things about urban planning come up. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about business improvement districts and what their role is. But what I was interested in what you said was you did a lot of work around rent control, and then now you're doing this work about urban regeneration and about how investment in these downtown neighborhoods can come without displacing people.
Yeah.
So do you see like rent control and policies that control rent as compatible with downtown investment? Like are those neighborhoods where you see this downtown investment working, are they also rent controlled? Like, are there policies in place that keep people from being displaced?
Well, that's a good, one of the things that Rich got into and influenced me, but yeah, rent control always should be hooked up with that. There should be some demands along with, you know, you're going to get something. When Santa Barbara got very close to getting rent control here, and Isla Vista, if it was a city, would have gotten rent control as well. But that's part of the deal, I think, is that you do need rent controls, you need condominium conversion control laws, you need limited equity co-ops, or you just need co-ops. I mean, they've been, even in Louisville, they have cooperatives where people can buy a house, a beautiful 2-bedroom condominium for $20,000. And this is like the recycling of good housing stock and so on.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that that's important. The thing is that when you go to the Midwest, you go to the South, people don't want to hear about limited equity co-ops because the housing there is so cheap. I mean, when I got to California, when I got to Louisville, I bought a house for $38,000. And $38,000 here. A Victorian, and it was a Victorian house, you know, it was 2 stories, 2 baths, big backyard and everything like that on that First Street and so on. So I gained from First Street by, you know, knocking it down. Now it's worth about $225,000 with the conversions and so on that have happened. So, you know, housing is very affordable. I mean, when I was, one of my students moved from Berkeley to San Luis Obispo, Billy Wiggs, he sold his house in the flatlands of Oakland. He lived there for 8 years, bought it for $250,000, sold it for $1 million, came down to San Luis Obispo, bought a ranch-style house, it's green, everything, I mean, awesome, it's really nice, but it's only $500,000. And a lot of it, I think, is related to income. And I think that's one of the findings of our book in Rethinking Rental Housing. The most important variable that affects housing prices is income. I once considered, moving back to San Francisco, and I currently make, it's a public record, I make $103,000 a year, which I think is great. I mean, just wonderful. But if I moved to have the same kind of house, the same kind of lifestyle, I would have to earn $350,000 in income. So that's some of the scattered things I can think about in terms of that. But Santa Barbara came so close. And if they ever incorporate Goleta and Isla Vista together, which I don't think they've done yet, right? They would have rent control.
Goleta's incorporated,
Yeah.
Isla Vista, they're looking at.
Yeah.
Still unincorporated.
And I disagree with Carmen Lodice, hi Carmen, over the issue of, I like the density. I think the density is a green thing, and keeping all the open space there and so on. We don't want just suburban houses, just tracks and so on. We used to rant about that, but I thought one of the things I liked about Isla Vista was the density and so on. That's, yes, I was at this conference last year at the University of Chicago, and some of the analysis was that New York University, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, was nowhere on anyone's mind about going there as a top 100 university. Now it's the #1 university. And why? Because it's in Greenwich Village. Young people want to be close to the action, close to people, and so on.
John, I have a question.
Yeah.
So gentrification, you sort of say 3 cheers. I take it down to 2 cheers. Let me ask you this. If it's a neighborhood of homeowners, then I can see improving it. But if it's a neighborhood of renters and it gentrifies, it drives rents up, doesn't it? And I mean, we're seeing this in the Mission District now in San Francisco, where Silicon Valley people are moving in, and the Latinos and low-income people who live there are being pushed out. So it seems to be gentrification sort of depends on who's doing the gentrifying, the nature, and how you protect the neighborhood. So I wonder if Louisville is typical, or what do you say about that?
Well, I think Louisville is more typical of a mid-sized city than, say, New York or San Francisco. But there's actually been a study. There's 2 studies that are pretty good. One is in the San Francisco Chronicle about the history of gentrification in the Mission, and who are the winners and who are the losers and so on. And they talk about families, Hispanic families. There's one case where there was 10 people in the family. They lived there for 100 years in the same house on Mission Street, and they had a decision to make. They weren't being pushed out, but they said, the father's dead, the mother's dead, we have this house, what should we do about it? And they made a decision, which was to sell it for $3 million, and that allowed them to move out into other areas and so on. So they weren't really pushed out, they cashed out. The second thing is that Billy Riggs, who's my colleague and partner in writing, actually did his dissertation on forces that push people in and out of neighborhoods and so on. And it was very interesting because he interviewed a lot of African American homeowners, and none of them felt pushed out. They felt like, hey, this is our chance, or this is our opportunity, wait just a second, to cash out and move on and take our retirement and so on. And my sister, who lives in Oakland, is thinking about doing the same thing.
But like I say, if it's a neighborhood of homeowners, that's different.
Right.
But if it's a neighborhood of renters and wealthy people start to move in, buy a property, they don't have the option of selling their apartment. Their rent's going.
But they have rent control, right?
Huh? Well, if you have, that's what I'm saying. So, you need policies in place to protect the.
Right. I'm there.
Right.
But I don't think you want a blanket statement. I mean, one of the things that Spike Lee came out, and it was people were ridiculing him when he said, he hated the gentrifiers and so on. And in fact, it was revealed quickly that he was one of the gentrifiers of buying up all these properties and so on in Brooklyn. And Brooklyn seems to be the epicenter too, where they're raising these issues. Hey, John. And but I think maybe it's not just one blanket condemnation. I think that especially if he's here.
Guess we have to say hi.
Hey, brother, what's going on? Nice to see you guys.
Oh, Rich Applebaum dressed for the.
Hey, nice to see you. Thank
Good
you.
to see you.
So John, I think there's another group coming.
Yeah.
We'll discuss this more, so thank you. Even though we had.
Give it up. Give it up for the little gaucho.